Okay, so assuming that willpower is a limited resource, we need some strategies to overcome this depletion, right? And so, going to go over a couple strategies that are adaptive in doing this, namely in implementation intentions, sorry, implementation intentions and self affirmation. I'll also go over some strategies that we use, maybe not even on purpose sometimes, that aren't quite as adaptive, but we do use them relatively consistently. So first, I want to talk about these implementation intentions. And so in this study, there's a depletion manipulation. So this manipulation was stand on one leg and count down by sevens, which I think it's pretty difficult. And so you can see why that would be depleting. And then the control condition is stand normally and count up by fives. So quite a bit easier there. And they did that Stroop color naming task that we've seen in the past or talked about in the past. And one condition used implementation intentions. The intentions were broadly along the lines of, when this pops up, say the color of the text immediately. And we see that this helps when depleted. And so quicker response time here is good, right? So in this is the control condition that's depleted, and so they're taking longer for each trial, or on average, the trials for the Stroop task, and that goes down to about the non-depleted control condition when using implementation intentions. And the idea is that implementation intentions help something become automatic, so it doesn't take as many resources to do whatever that thing is. You don't have to think through it as much, it just happens more automatically. And so a depletion of resources that happens before that is now no longer as much of a problem. Another example of implementation intentions being beneficial stems from overcoming a bad habit. So here in this study, participants worked at a telecom company, and they formed implementation intentions to recycle paper that they threw out instead of throwing it in the trash. And so this is amount of paper per day in kilograms to put in the trash. And so what's nice about this study, right, is you can actually weigh it. So the dependent variable is relatively easy there. And so what we see is that these implementation intentions led to a large decrease in the amount of trash and the amount of paper put in the trash as opposed to the recycling over time. And so then implementation intentions are just useful when it comes to overcoming a bad habit, which obviously takes effort and self-control to overcome this when the automatic behavior is to just throw it in the trash. Additionally, we can use ourself as a resource, although these are the strategies in which maybe they help in this ego depletion department, but they can certainly be maladaptive in other areas. But anyways, so we're talking about ego depletion, right? So the ego, with the ego, we're talking about the self, and being depleted can potentially be thought of as a lack of self resources, right? And not even potentially, it can be thought of as a lack of self resources. And the idea here is that when we're talking about these self resources associated with ego depletion, that this could be tied into our self worth. And so there might be an overarching just self-worth resource that people are trying to defend. And we'll get into actually more self-motives, self-efficacy, self-worth topics in the next section here. But anyway, strategies that we sometimes use to defend this self-worth includes biased social comparisons. So we have this tendency to compare downward, or to people who maybe have less standing than us and whatever it is, and this makes us feel better about ourselves. We've talked about biased attributions in the past, right? And so we're biased to, typically, not always, certainly, but typically we're biased to take credit for success and blame failure on external things. Like if you have a bad day on the golf course or something, blaming it on the weather, versus if you play great, oh, it's all me. I'm just that good. And then we also use selective attention. So we pay more attention to information that is positive to the self. Mentioned one of these biases previously, but that's not always the case. But actually, when that's not always the case, that can lead to some self-worth issues, right? We also change our beliefs after our actions that do not match our original beliefs, and we'll do that as a way of this cognitive dissonance reduction. So there are a few ways we can go about dissonance reduction. This is one of them. And finally, we've talked about self-handicapping and how this can be very maladaptive for performance over time. But this is one thing that we do to, in large part, to protect this self-worth. And we basically just create excuses in advance as a defense mechanism. And so the reason why I'm bringing all this up is ego depletion, again, might be related to this self-resource or the self-worth. So engaging in self-control then may deplete this resource, and that may be then threatening to our self-worth. If it's depleting this resource that's tied in with self-worth, that could be threatening to ourselves. And in order to defend against that threat, we need to compensate in some way, right? So either we can maybe give into a temptation, like we've talked about here in the last previous lectures, grabbing that cheesecake, or we can use one of these defensive behaviors here as well to protect this self-worth and fight against this depletion. However, certainly some of those, like self-handicapping we talked about, biases, biased social comparisons can definitely be maladaptive, although that is something that we do seem to want to do. There is a more adaptive way that we can go about fighting this ego depletion. So one of these ways is, sorry, I wanted to show the kid's face. I don't really have any good place to put me here, but sorry, kid. One of the ways we can do this is self-affirmation. And again, this is more adaptive strategy. It involves just asserting that the self is good in some other way. So I don't know, I have a little bit of trouble going about defining self-affirmation without using the word affirmation, but it's affirming or asserting or reminding oneself of one's own important beliefs and the positivity of those beliefs. So that can be whatever is important to you. It might be political beliefs, religious beliefs, wherever your moral beliefs stem from. And basically this can help when we're feeling some sort of other threat to the self. And so in this study, we see that this helps with overcoming ego depletion. And depletion, I like the way that they manipulate depletion here. It was manipulated by having participants write a story, either just free writing, no instructions, just write a story, or in the depletion condition, in the regulated writing, they had to write their story without using letters A or N, which definitely, I mean, if you even try to write a couple sentences without the letters A or N, right, that's pretty tough. But then they also had participants in one condition use self-affirmation. So write about a value that's important to you. And then they did this cold presser task, which we see in the kid here, which It's very difficult. Basically, you're leaving your hand in freezing cold ice water. And it's very difficult. Over time, that becomes painful, right? And so it takes a lot of effort and self-control in order to keep your hand in there. And we see that in the no affirmation condition, it's about what you would expect here, where those who were depleted with that original task had less resources and did not keep up the cold pressor task. They did not persist nearly as much as those who were not depleted. However, we see that self-affirmation actually pretty much reversed this effect and did a good job helping participants overcome depletion and be able to use more self-control in this other task. Another example of a benefit of self-affirmation, we'll have a few examples here. So with impulse control, there was a delay of gratification task in this study, similar to that marshmallow task where you just basically just get rewarded for delaying gratification, more of a reward if you wait. And again, with the depletion, there was free riding, regular riding, and depletion leads to less delay of gratification, right? That's about what you expect here. And without the use of affirmation in the depletion condition, but when affirmation was used, we see that effect go away. So people will delay gratification more, as if they were not depleted to begin with. And so this gets at overcoming this impulse control to get that smaller reward right away and wait for the larger reward. Additionally, we talked about those defensives that maybe weren't quite as adaptive, right? But those defenses are relatively interchangeable with each other when it comes to protecting self-worth, and self-affirmation can also be interchangeable with these defensive behaviors. And so here in this study, we're looking at defensive attributions. So we talked about, again, when something good happens. So here we're talking about sports, taking all the credit when something good happens, right, to either yourself or the team. But when something bad happens, blaming it on external factors. So the refs suck, the other team cheated, things like that. Maybe that's a little bit extreme, but think you understand what I'm getting at here. And in this study, just looking at attributions to team causes, we have no affirmation, affirmation for those who won, those who lost. For the no affirmation condition, this is about what you'd expect, making more attributions to the team, right? More internal attributions when things went well and they won, and less when they lost, likely because a lot of those attributions are then going to external sources. However, when using self-affirmation, the idea is that then this loss becomes less threatening to you've affirmed another positive thing about yourself. So then it's maybe more of, I lost this game and that's okay, versus, oh, I lost this game, it's so important. I lose at everything, things like that. And so the effect goes away here in the self-affirmation condition, showing that self-affirmation can be interchangeable for defensive self-worth with other defenses that aren't as adaptive, like defensive attributions. Finally, another example, last slide here, but another example of how self-affirmation can be interchangeable, or reduce effects of self-handicapping here. So classic self-handicapping strategy is, having thoughts, saying things like, I'm experiencing a lot of stress right now. Sometimes that's just actually the case and it's not self-handicapping, but other times it is used as self-handicapping. And so SHS, we're talking about a self-handicapping scale here. So low, we have low in self-handicapping behaviors, high in self-handicapping behaviors. And so therefore, pretty likely just normally to, in this control condition, report that there's a lot of stress going on, right? And we see that affirmation works. Both of these are affirmation works to decrease this use of stress as self-handicapping for those high on the self-handicapping scale. And we see that self-affirmation is the most beneficial. So if this is something you want to try, it seems to be the most beneficial when affirming something that's unrelated to the task. And so let's say you are going to take a math test, and maybe that's threatening for you. You're worried about not being very good at math. It would be more beneficial to affirm something else that you're good at as opposed to affirming something related to math. So affirming like maybe you're good at learning languages, affirming that seems to be more beneficial than affirming something related to math. And this just demonstrates that self-affirmation, or in other words, positive information, can serve as a resource or a standard of comparison, and can help decrease this defensive behavior of self-handicapping, while also decreasing the effects of depletion. And that is it for this section. Next, we'll get into some self-motives, self-processes, and topics in that area.